fellow attorneys to the National Bankruptcy Academy video series. I'm your host, Attorney Robert Schaller, an attorney with over 34 years of experience and a registered certified public accountant. Today, we'll be discussing Schedule J with a line-by-line analysis with real-world commentary. I hope you enjoy the video. Every Chapter 7 debtor must file a schedule of current expenses identified as Official Form 106J, Schedule J, your expenses. This form is commonly called just Schedule J. Current expenses include actual expenses for rent, mortgages, utilities, food, clothing, and medical, transportation, insurance, taxes, vehicle expenses, etc. But a common question is, should the debtor list the expenses that the debtor stopped paying? For example, if the debtor has stopped paying a mortgage payment and is in foreclosure proceeding, should the debtor list that mortgage expense on Schedule J? The answer is yes. The debtor lists all expenses, whether the debtor is current or delinquent on those debts. Schedule J provides an estimate of the monthly expenses as of the date the bankruptcy case is filed. For the debtor, any dependents, and any other person in the debtor's household whose income is included on Schedule I, your income. If the debtor is married and filed jointly, include both spouses' expenses. If the debtor is married and cohabitating, but is filing individually without the spouse, also include the expenses of the non-filing spouse. However, the non-filing spouse's expenses are not listed if the debtor is legally separated from the non-filing spouse. If the debtor is filing jointly and keeps a separate household for the non-filing spouse, then the debtor must complete a companion form Schedule J-2, Expenses for Separate Household of the Debtor. Do not include expenses that other members of the household may pay directly from their income if the debtor did not include that income on Schedule I. For example, if the debtor has a roommate and the debtor divides the rent and utilities and the debtor has not listed the roommate's contribution to the household expenses in line 11 of Schedule I, the debtor would list only the debtor's share of these expenses on Schedule J. Now show all totals as monthly payments. If the debtor has a weekly, quarterly, or annual payment, the debtor must calculate how much you would spend on those items every month. This is a common problem. Debtors frequently forget to convert their expenses into monthly figures. For example, gasoline fill-ups for the debtor's car made on a weekly basis must be converted to monthly expenditures. Do not list an expense, any payment on any credit card debts incurred before filing bankruptcy. Do not include business expenses on this form. The debtor is required to account for those business expenses as part of determining net business income on Schedule I, line 8A. If the debtor has nothing to report for a line, write 0. Don't leave it blank. Now let's turn our attention to this bankruptcy form with a line-by-line analysis with real-world commentary. I hope you enjoy the video. So now let's go look at Official Form 106J, Schedule J, your expenses. In the upper corner is the familiar box starting with the instruction, fill in this information to identify your case. This is where we're going to identify Debtor 1, Debtor 2, and also the United States Bankruptcy Court in which the case will be filed. So let's start filling it out. Debtor 1 is George Washington. Debtor 2 is Martha Washington. And we're going to be filing this case in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. So let's look at the pull-down menu. We're going to scroll down and look for the Eastern District of Virginia. And there it is. And now I'll click on it. Next is the case number. If this case was filed with the petition and the schedules at the same time, then no case number would be included. And the reason for that is no case number is assigned until the petition is filed and the case number is assigned by the clerk of the U.S. Bankruptcy Court. If Schedule J was filed with the petition, then no number would be included here. Instead, electronically, a number would be affixed by the clerk of the court. However, if this is an amended filing, then a case number would be known because by definition, if it's an amended filed Schedule J, there had to have been an original Schedule J, so there would be a case number filed. So let's show what would happen if this is an amended. First, you'd go over here to the right. It says, check if this is an amended filing, and I check the box. Then I'd come back over here under case number, and I would include the case number. However, in this particular case, George and Martha Washington are filing Schedule J with the petition, so there is no case number. So I'm going to delete the case number, and I'm going to uncheck the box. Now notice that there's a box below the amended filing box, and this is new for the schedules except for Schedule I, meaning this second box does not show up on Schedule A/B, Schedule B, C, D, E, F, G, or H. But it does show up on Schedule I, and it does show up on Schedule J. And the second box says, a supplement showing post-petition Chapter 13 expenses as of the following date. This box would not apply to a Chapter 7 case, so I would uncheck the box. Now, let's go over here to the directions for Official Form 106J, Schedule J, your expenses. And this instruction state, quote, be as complete and accurate as possible. If two married people are filing together, both are equally responsible for supplying correct information. If more space is needed, attach another sheet to this form. On the top of any additional page, write your name and case number if known. Answer every question. So let's scroll up to see Part 1. Part 1 is titled, Describe Your Household. Line 1 asks the question, is this a joint case? If it's not, click the No button and go to line 2. But in this particular case, this is a joint case. George and Martha Washington are filing jointly. So we're going to click the Yes box. Does debtor 2 live in a separate household? No, they live together. So we're going to click the No box. As I stated earlier, if the answer is yes, then debtor 2 would have to file Official Form 106J-2, expenses for a separate household of debtor 2. That's most commonly when a debtor is living on a work assignment in another location. Line 2 asks the question, does the debtor have any dependents? And note it says do not list debtor 1 and debtor 2. Dependents are generally children or adults where the debtors are taking care of them, like a senior mother or grandmother. It also says do not state the dependents' names. For privacy purposes, the rules were changed where you no longer state the debtors' names. So in the case of George and Martha Washington, they do have dependents. So we're going to click the Yes box. And it says fill out this information for each dependent. Going down to the first box, it says dependents relationship to debtor 1 or debtor 2. So don't put the name, put the relationship. So I'm going to put down child. You could also put down daughter. You can put down stepdaughter. You could put down son, stepson, mother, grandmother, whatever the relationship is. And then the dependent's age. The debtors have an 11-year-old child. So let's put in the age, 11. And ask the question, does this dependent live with you? And the answer is yes. This child lives with the Washingtons. So click yes. The debtors also have a second child. So you put down child. And again, you could put down son, you could put down daughter, whatever it is. I like to be more neutral and just put down child for privacy reasons. And this child is 14 years old. And this child also lives with the debtor. So click yes. Now we want to scroll down to line 3. Line 3 asks the question, do your expenses include expenses of people other than yourself and your dependents? In this case, the answer would be no. So check the no box. Let's scroll up to Part 2. Part 2 is titled, Estimate Your Ongoing Monthly Expenses, with the directions as follows, quote, estimate your expenses as of your bankruptcy filing date unless you are using this form as a supplement in a Chapter 13 case to report expenses as of the date after the bankruptcy is filed. If this is a supplemental Schedule J, check the box at the top of the form and fill in the applicable date. Include expenses paid for with non-cash government assistance if you know the value of such assistance and have included it on Schedule I, your income. Line 4. Line 4 directs the debtor to identify the rental or homeowner expense for your residence. Include first mortgage payments and any rent for the ground or lot. So in George and Martha Washington's case, they spend $2,500 on their mortgage, their first mortgage, $2,500. And then On line 4, it says, if not included in line 4, add the following expenses. 4A is real estate taxes. In George and Martha's case, real estate taxes are not included in the mortgage payment. George and Martha Washington paid them separately. So therefore, real estate taxes should be listed on 4A. And the amount of that is $850. Now, in the event that real estate taxes were included in the mortgage, then 4A would be 0 because the real estate taxes would be included on line 4. Next, 4B. 4B says property, homeowners, or renters insurance. Again, if this is included in the mortgage, then this line would be 0. If instead the debtors pay that separately, which means in addition to the mortgage, then we include it in 4B, and that's the case with George and Martha Washington. They pay $145 a month insurance on their home. Line 4C is home maintenance, repair, and upkeep expenses. Well, since it's a home, that would not be included in the mortgage, and they would be responsible for making those payments. And in this case, it's $200 a month. Now that leads to an interesting question. Do they pay $200 every single month for maintenance, repair, and upkeep? No, they would not. This would be on average. So for most homeowners, something like a washing machine breaking, that doesn't happen every month. In fact, it only happens once a year. But you'd have to prorate the monthly expense based on what you anticipate over a year. So normal things, it would be monthly expenses, but other things would actually happen quarterly or just periodically when things break. So try to use an average for a monthly expense. Line 4D asks for homeowners association or condominium dues. In this case, the debtor's home is a single-family home. There is no association and there is no condominium dues. So that would be 0. Scrolling down. Line 5. Line 5 requires the debtor to identify any additional mortgage payments for the debtor's residence, such as a home equity loan or a junior mortgage. Sometimes the debtor can have 1 mortgage, 2 mortgages, and even 3 mortgages. Those additional mortgage payments would be included on line 5. In the case of George and Martha Washington, they do not have a second mortgage or a home equity loan, so the amount on line 5 would be 0. Line 6 asks for utility costs. And it's divided between 6A, 6B, 6C, and 6D. 6A is the amount for electricity, heating, and natural gas. Now, personally, I wish these weren't lumped together because that turns to be a large amount, and the trustees like to raise their eyebrows whenever there's a large amount on Schedule J. However, the form does lump them all together. So in the case of George and Martha Washington, when you lump all these costs together, it's $325. The next 6B is the monthly payments for water, sewer, garbage collection. Be careful here. A lot of these are quarterly payments. And if they are quarterly, you have to make sure you divide them by 3 to get a monthly amount. So in the case of George and Martha Washington, it's $144. Line 6C is a utility cost for telephone, cell phone, internet, cable, and cable services. And for George and Martha Washington, that amount is $189. And if there are some other utilities, you might live in a community with a special utility bill, in which case you'd want to specifically specify what that utility bill is and what the amount. In the case of George and Martha Washington, there are none, and that would be 0. The next line is line 7. The debtor is required to identify the monthly food and household supply bills. So that's a difficult one for some people because most people do not keep track of how much they spend on food. So they'd have to average that. If you're lucky, you have a client who pays everything by a debit card or a credit card, in which case you could always take the statements and try to average out how much money was food and household supplies on a given month. In the case of George and Martha Washington, it's $800. Next, line 8 asks for the amount that the debtors pay for childcare and children's educational costs on a monthly basis. That, again, is something that should be looked at on a monthly basis because typically these payments are paid either quarterly or by semester, in which case you have to make sure you adjust them so it's a monthly payment. And for George and Martha Washington, it's $150.